10 years is a long time to be cast as the family disappointment. Long enough that the label stops feeling like an insult and starts feeling like a role you're expected to play, like a mask they hand you at the door and get offended if you take it off. In my family, that mask was mine from the day I was 16, and my guidance counselor called my mother and used the words strong potential. My mother heard potential and translated it into prestige. My father heard it and translated it into future money. My older brother, Nathan, heard it and translated it into competition. And me, I just heard a door creak open. My name is Mara Ellis. I'm 31 now, and I'm going to tell you what happened the night my family finally realized they'd been laughing at the wrong person for a decade. It started, like most of my pain did, at a dinner table. Thanksgiving at my parents' house was never about gratitude. It was about scoreboard updates, promotions, engagements, mortgage rates, who bought what, who met whom, who got invited where. Every year, my mother would put out the good plates and the expensive napkins like we were hosting royalty, and every year she would slide her gaze toward me the way you look at a stain you can't scrub out. "You're still at that little job," she'd ask, like she was making conversation. It wasn't a little job. It just wasn't one she could brag about. I worked at a nonprofit arts foundation in the city, coordinating programs for public schools, building partnerships, raising funds in quiet ways that don't come with billboards or newspaper profiles. The work mattered. It didn't sparkle. My family needed sparkle. Nathan had sparkle. Nathan was 35, married to a woman who looked like she was born in a jewelry store, and employed at my father's company, Ellis and Crow Financial, which basically meant he had a golden escalator and a title that sounded impressive at country clubs. My parents treated him like a stock that always went up, even when he did nothing. Me, I was the stock they forgot they owned, then got annoyed when it didn't pay dividends. The year I turned 21, I made a choice that branded me as the disappointment forever. I declined my father's offer to place me at the firm. I didn't want to be placed like a decorative plant. I wanted to earn what I did. I wanted to matter for reasons that weren't connected to his name. My father's face had tightened and he'd said, "Fine, go be noble. Just don't come back when noble doesn't pay rent." So I learned how to live without asking them for anything. I rented a tiny studio with a window that faced a brick wall. I ate noodles and bruised apples. I took freelance work at night, quietly, anonymously, because I hated the idea of anyone thinking I was building a life off pity. When friends went out, I said I was tired. When my mother called and asked if I'd finally reconsidered, I said no. And somewhere in those years, I became very good at hiding. I hid my exhaustion. I hid my fear. I hid how lonely it is to be the one person in your family who isn't allowed to be proud. What I didn't hide was my attendance at my little cousin Leela's school events. Leela was my aunt's daughter, 12 years old when this story begins, and she was the only person in my extended family who looked at me like I wasn't broken merchandise. She was brilliant, loud, curious. She loved music, loved science, loved asking questions that made adults sweat, and she loved me because I listened. When she got accepted into a statewide youth arts program, my mother acted like it was a victory for the Ellis bloodline. She posted about it. She bought balloons. She said, "Clearly she gets her talent from our side." I smiled and let her have it, because Leela didn't need to see the ugliness in the background. 2 months later, Leela's father lost his job. My aunt didn't tell anyone at first. Pride runs in the family like a bad habit. But I noticed the shift. Her texts got shorter, her voice got tight. Leela stopped asking for rides to rehearsals because she didn't want to burden anyone. One afternoon, Leela called me crying. She'd been selected to perform at the Centennial Civic Gala, this huge televised fundraiser that pulled in donors, politicians, CEOs, and local celebrities. A live stage, bright lights, orchestra, the whole thing. But the program required a participation fee for costumes and travel. Not enormous, but enough that it might as well have been a wall. "I'm not going to go," she whispered. "It's okay, I'll just quit." Something cold went through me. Not anger at the fee. Anger at the way my family's priorities could drown a kid's dream without even noticing. "Don't quit," I told her. "I've got you." I didn't have much savings, but I had something better than savings. I had skills my family never bothered to understand. For years, I'd been doing quiet consulting work on the side, grant writing, donor strategy, program design, helping small organizations secure big funding. People paid well for that, especially when you could show results. I never told my parents because I didn't want their approval to be the tax I paid on my own life. But I had money, not Ellis and Crow money, not private jet money, but enough to protect one kid's chance. I paid the fee. I bought Leela's dress. I drove her to rehearsals. I sat in the back and clapped until my hands stung. And then, 2 weeks before the gala, my mother called me. "Mara," she said, in the careful voice she used when she wanted something, "we're all attending the Centennial Gala. Your father's company is sponsoring a table. It'll be a big night for Nathan. Lots of networking, important people." I waited. "We want you there too," she added, like she was offering charity. "It would be nice to show a united family." I almost laughed. United. That was what you called a group of people who only linked arms when a camera showed up. But Leela was performing that night. If my parents were going, I needed to be there. Not for them, for her. "I'll be there," I said. "Wear something appropriate," my mother warned. "It's formal, try not to look, you know." Like the disappointment, she meant. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time. Because here's the truth I hadn't admitted yet. I wasn't just going to the gala to watch Leela perform. I was going because I'd been invited too, not as someone's plus one, not as an accessory at my father's table. I'd been invited onto the stage. And my family had no idea. Comment justice if you believe she deserved justice. If you're still with me, stay close, because the next part is where my family's favorite story about me starts to crack. The Centennial Civic Gala wasn't just a fancy night out. It was a televised fundraiser with a live orchestra, corporate sponsors, and that particular kind of wealthy crowd that claps like they're doing you a favor. Ellis and Crow had purchased a sponsor table near the front, which meant my parents were treating the evening like a public audition for their perfect family brand. The irony? The foundation I worked for had partnered with the gala this year. That's why Leela's youth program got the performance slot, and that's why I'd been pulled into months of behind-the-scenes planning that nobody ever notices. When my mother pictured the gala, she saw Nathan shaking hands with donors and my father being called sir by people in suits. When I pictured it, I saw a lighting cue list, a production schedule, and a terrified 12-year-old hoping she didn't trip in front of cameras. The morning of the gala, I went to Leela's rehearsal at the Civic Center. She was in her dress already, midnight blue, simple lines, nothing like the glittery costumes some parents try to force on kids. She looked like herself, which was the point. She was humming to calm down, fingers tapping her thigh. "You okay?" I asked. "No," she said honestly. "Yes, maybe, Aunt Mara, what if I mess up?" "If you mess up," I told her, "you recover. That's what pros do." She looked at me like I'd just revealed a secret code to adulthood. Then her eyes narrowed, suddenly suspicious. "Why are you not nervous?" she asked. Because I'd already been on stages, just not the kind with spotlights. I'd spoken at donor events. I'd pitched projects to boards. I'd handled crisis calls when a venue canceled or a sponsor threatened to pull out. The only difference tonight was the camera, and cameras don't scare you once you've survived a decade of your own family watching you fail on purpose. Around 4, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother, where something real this time. No thrift store experiments. I stared at the screen and felt that old instinct to shrink, to soften, to make myself less threatening so they wouldn't have to sharpen their cruelty. Then I walked to my closet and pulled out the dress I'd saved for. Not designer, not screaming money, just elegant, structured, the kind of dress that makes people stand up straighter when you enter. I pinned my hair back, put on my grandmother's watch, and looked at my reflection until my shoulders remembered where they belonged. At 6:30, I arrived at my parents' house because my mother demanded we enter together. Translation. She wanted control of the optics. Nathan's car was already in the driveway, glossy and expensive, the kind of vehicle my father loved because it looked like victory. Inside, my mother fluttered around the foyer, adjusting earrings, smoothing invisible wrinkles, practicing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. When she saw me, she froze. "Oh," she said, and I heard the disappointment that I didn't look cheap enough for her narrative. "That's better." My father looked me up and down and nodded like a man approving a chair he didn't buy. Nathan glanced at me, then smirked, because Nathan couldn't process me without ranking me. "Wow," he said, "Mara can play dress-up." His wife, Celeste, tilted her head. "It's a nice look," she said, in the tone people use for a pet learning a trick. I smiled politely. "Thank you." On the drive over, my mother rehearsed lines about how proud she was of Nathan. My father talked about potential new clients. Nathan talked about himself. No one asked about Leela. I watched streetlights slide across the window and felt something settle in me, calm, heavy, unavoidable. Tonight was not about begging my family to see me. It was about watching what they did when they thought they didn't have to. We pulled up to the Civic Center, and the place glowed like a jewel box. Valet attendants in black, a red carpet, people drifting in clusters, laughing too loudly, holding their invitations like passports to importance. Inside, an event coordinator spotted me immediately and hurried over. "Mara," she said, relief flooding her face. "Thank God. The presenter's mic pack is failing and the producer wants you on standby." My mother's head snapped toward her like a predator hearing movement. "Excuse me," my mother asked. The coordinator smiled politely. "Hi, I'm Jenna, production lead. Mara has basically kept this entire program from collapsing." I felt my father's gaze sharpen. Nathan's smile faltered just a little. My mother recovered fast. "Mara helps with little charity things," she said, dismissive. "It keeps her busy." Jenna blinked. "Oh, no, Mara is our senior program strategist. She wrote the sponsorship deck that got half these tables sold." My father's lips parted like he wanted to speak, then didn't know what words fit. Nathan's eyes narrowed, the way they always did when he smelled a story he hadn't controlled. Before anyone could ask more, Jenna leaned in close to me. "Also, your youth performer, Leela. She's shaking backstage. Can you come?" I didn't look at my family. I didn't need permission. I just nodded and followed Jenna, heels clicking on marble, into the side hallway that led behind the curtain. The backstage air smelled like hairspray, cables, and adrenaline. Leela sat on a folding chair, hugging her arms. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "I can't feel my fingers," she whispered. I crouched in front of her. "Look at me." Her eyes found mine. "You're not doing this to be perfect," I said softly. "You're doing this because your voice deserves space." She swallowed. "What if people laugh?" "Then they're telling on themselves," I said. "Not on you." Her breathing slowed. And then, from somewhere beyond the curtain, I heard my mother's laugh. Bright, performative. The laugh she used on strangers when she wanted them to believe she was kind. It made something in my stomach twist, because I knew exactly who she was laughing with. Donors, sponsors, people who would never see the way she spoke to me at kitchen tables. That's when the stage manager hurried over, headset on, eyes wide. "Mara," he said, "we have a change. The board chair wants to add a community impact recognition before the youth performance." My heart didn't race, it just focused. "Who's presenting it?" I asked. He hesitated. "They asked for you. They said you're the one who should be named on stage." Out in the ballroom, my family was sipping champagne at a front table, convinced they knew exactly how the night would go. They had no idea my name was already printed in the program. "Type yes if you want to see all targets hit at once." The stage manager handed me a laminated card with the cue order like it was nothing, like it wasn't a grenade. "Mara, you're up after the board chair's remarks," he said. 60 seconds, Then we roll into the recognition, then Leela. My throat went dry anyway. Not because I was scared of speaking. I'd spoken 100 times. It was the fact that my family would be watching, and for once, they wouldn't be watching me to judge whether I deserved a seat at their table. They'd be watching because the room had decided I mattered. I took Leela's hands. Her fingers were cold. Listen, I told her. In a few minutes, you're going to hear my name, and you might see some people in the audience looking shocked. That's not your problem. You do your performance. You give them your whole heart. Then afterward, we eat dessert and laugh about how nervous you were. Leela blinked. Why will I hear your name? I smiled small, because the truth has good timing. On the other side of the curtain, the orchestra warmed up. The crowd's chatter rose and fell like waves. A camera operator rolled past, checking angles. A volunteer whispered into a walkie. Everything moved with that high-stakes smoothness that makes rich people feel like their money is doing something meaningful. Jenna found me again, eyes bright. You ready? As I'll ever be, I said, and realized I meant it. The board chair went out first, a polished man in a tux who spoke the language of donors fluently. Gratitude, impact, community, legacy. My parents would love him. He made generosity sound like an investment. From the crack in the curtain, I could see our sponsor table. My father sat with shoulders back, hands folded, the posture of a man who thought he owned the room. My mother leaned in toward a woman with diamond earrings, smiling wide, nodding hard. Nathan lounged like he was bored, because boredom was his way of signaling status. Celeste was scrolling her phone under the table. Then the board chair said, "Tonight, we're honoring someone who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes, someone who believes access matters more than applause." My mother clapped politely, already half-turned toward her neighbor. The chair continued. This person built partnerships that brought arts programs into schools that had been forgotten. She secured sponsors without making children feel like charity cases. She wrote the strategy that helped us double youth participation this year. My father's head lifted slightly. I watched it happen, subtle as a shark sensing blood. And tonight, the chair said, we want to recognize her contribution publicly because her work is the reason some of these kids are standing backstage right now. The room quieted. You could feel people lean forward. And that person is Mara Ellis. The world did this strange thing where it didn't explode, but it did sharpen, like everything clicked into focus. My mother's smile froze midair. Nathan's posture snapped upright. My father's hands separated slowly, as if he needed to prove to himself he was still real. Then the spotlight hit the edge of the curtain, and my cue came through the headset. Go. I walked out. The applause was immediate, warm, and it had nothing to do with my last name. It was for me, for the work, for the impact, for the story the room had just been told. I reached the microphone and let the noise wash over me for a second. In the front row, my mother's mouth was slightly open. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I didn't glare at her. I didn't smirk at Nathan. I didn't search for my father's approval. I just stood there and let my spine remember it was mine. The board chair shook my hand and stepped aside. I leaned toward the mic. Thank you, I said, voice steady. I'm honored, but I want to be clear, this isn't about one person. This is about what happens when communities decide that talent doesn't belong only to people who can afford it. From my periphery, I saw Nathan's jaw tighten. He hated that kind of sentence. It made his world feel less safe. I continued. Tonight you'll hear music from students who practiced in cramped living rooms, who borrowed instruments, who took buses across town because someone finally told them their voice mattered. And if you're here because you love legacy, then I hope you'll consider what kind you're building. I paused just long enough to let it land. Because kids remember who showed up, I said softly, and they remember who didn't. I thanked the sponsors, the volunteers, the staff. Then I turned slightly, looking toward the wings. And now, before our next performance, I want to recognize a student who represents exactly why we do this. That wasn't on the card. That was me. Jenna's eyes widened backstage, but she didn't stop me. She knew I wouldn't waste the moment. "Leela Hart," I said, clear as a bell. "Come here." Leela stepped out like she was walking onto a different planet. She blinked at the lights, then found me, and her shoulders eased. I took her hand and guided her to the mic. The audience made the sound people make when they see a child trying hard. This gentle, collective softness. "This young woman almost didn't get to be here tonight," I said, and I heard my mother inhale sharply because she hated discomfort that didn't match the Dacre. Not because she lacked talent, not because she lacked discipline, but because life happens, and sometimes a small barrier tries to steal a big dream. I could feel my aunt's eyes on me somewhere in the crowd, but I didn't look. This wasn't about making anyone feel ashamed. It was about making sure Leela understood that her struggle wasn't invisible. "So tonight," I said, "Leela is performing not as a favor, not as a charity slot, but because she earned this stage." I leaned down to her. "Tell them what you told me," I whispered. Leela swallowed and stepped forward. Her voice was tiny at first. I want to thank my Aunt Mara," she said, "because she didn't let me quit." The room applauded again, and I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot that had been living there for years. Then I heard a chair scrape from the sponsor table. My mother had stood up. She was smiling, of course she was, but her eyes were glassy with panic. She was trying to pivot, trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. She started clapping too hard, like she could clap herself into being the hero of this. I looked at her for one brief second, and in that look I didn't accuse her. I didn't beg her. I simply let her see that the stage had never been hers. Then I turned back to Leela. "You're going to do great," I whispered. As Leela moved to the performance spot, I stepped off to the side. The orchestra began. The cameras rolled. And while my cousin played the first notes, I watched my family, not with anger but with clarity. Nathan leaned in toward my father, whispering fast. My father's face was stiff, calculating. My mother dabbed her eyes as if she'd been proud all along. Celeste finally looked up from her phone, brows raised, trying to figure out which version of me would be profitable to like. The music rose, beautiful and brave, filling the hall. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like the family disappointment. I felt like the person they'd underestimated because it was convenient. Share this video so communities understand what was hiding. Leela finished to a standing ovation. She bowed, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. As she ran off stage, she threw her arms around me. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "you did." Then Jenna grabbed my elbow. "Mara, the press table wants you after intermission," she said, "and the board chair wants to introduce you to a donor who funds national programs." Behind us, I heard my mother's voice, too loud, too sweet. "Mara, honey." I turned. She was coming toward me with that public smile, the one that said, "Let's pretend we've always been close." And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to play along. If this shocked you, comment exposed below.